Many newcomers to the Episcopal Church may be familiar with the proposition that the Anglican way is a via media, or a middle way between Catholicism and Protestantism. You may also be aware that the Episcopal Church arose from the Church of England. The next two lessons will be devoted to church history, and I will try to place our life as a church within the wider historical context. This session will be on the English heritage, and Session 2 on the American Church. In both videos, the emphasis will be on what is distinctive about Anglicanism, not on what is held in common with all other Christians. The central lesson of both sessions is that the Anglican via media is not merely a compromise, but a distinct approach to living the Christian life. It's not merely a splitting of the difference between the two camps, but a third way that incorporates the best of the other two. A recurring theme will be balancing competing claims, or living in the tension between opposites: English and Catholic, Protestant and Catholic, English and American, community and individual. Anglican theology comes in many flavors. You may know some of these words already, but there are Anglo-Catholics, Evangelicals, Charismatics, Liberals, and Broad Church Episcopalians. Some of the terms that have been applied to these different perspectives. These different perspectives are all contained within Anglicanism, but are mediated by and through common prayer. What holds us together as a church is a common way of praying, not a common way of believing. That means that within the Anglican family we have individuals and churches that do not agree on some major issues, but we all seek to exercise a charitable latitude towards others in order that we may find God's truth. No one among us nor group within the church contains all truth. There are no insiders. So let's jump into the church history. English Christianity existed as a distinctive branch of the trunk of the Apostolic Church from the earliest times of the Christian era. It synthesized Celtic practices and Roman practices into a distinctive Ecclesia Anglicana long before the Reformation. The first British Christians were Romans. We read of Romano-British bishops attending the Council of Arles in France, what is now France, in 314. Eberus of York, Restitutus of London, and Anadelphius of Lincoln were three bishops who attended, and we know this because they filed expense vouchers with the emperor, who paid them back their fees. Now, there is no evidence that British bishops attended the Council of Nicaea in 325, but at least three attended the Council of Arminium in 360. Now, in that year, the first barbarian invasions of Britain began. In the following century, the Romans withdrew their legions from Britain, and the Anglo-Saxon invasion began. Many British Christians were slaughtered or driven west into Wales and north into Scotland. In the centuries during which Celtic Christianity was separated from Roman Christianity, the Celts developed a distinctive form of monasticism and church polity, and spirituality centered on creation and the cross. Contact with the church in Rome was all but lost, but the church remained alive in the west and the north. This was the time of St. Patrick of Ireland, of St. David of Wales, and St. Ninian of Scotland. Not to mention, earlier, St. Alban, the first Roman British martyr. In 597, when Pope Gregory the Great sent Augustine of Canterbury to evangelize the English, the church had been driven into extinction in the south and east, but the Celtic church was flourishing in Wales, the north, Scotland, and Ireland. As Augustine's missions spread north and west from Canterbury, they soon came into contact with the Celtic churches. While both were Christians holding the same doctrinal beliefs, the churches were organized differently, with the Roman Church founded on an episcopal order, led by bishops, while the Celts were centered around monasteries led by abbots. The churches also had different dates for Easter and other secondary distinctions. In 1664, at the Council of Whitby, the King of Northumberland accepted the Roman date for Easter rather than the Celtic one, and the two branches began to grow together. During the next centuries, the Celtic monasteries adopted a characteristic Benedictine spirituality, while the parish system, favored by the Romans, took hold, and soon every square inch of England was part of a parish. Now, there's been a history of conflict between church and state throughout English history, from the Norman conquest of 1066 to Henry II's controversies with Thomas à Becket, to John's confrontation with Archbishop Stephen Langton that led to the Magna Carta, to Henry VIII's displeasure with his Chancellor Thomas More. The relationship of the Church to the Crown was never easy. The 16th century Reformation in England was different in character from the Continental Reformation. Neither Lutheran nor Calvinist, the Church of England was affected by both. In England, the Reformation was a political event, expressive of an emerging English national feeling. The Parliament in 1534 passed the Act of Supremacy, making the king the head of the Church in England as the culmination of a series of laws rejecting various claims to entitlement of the Bishop of Rome. Henry VIII did not favor continental Protestant ideas and did not start the Church of England. Henry considered himself a Catholic. You will hear about Henry VIII and his divorces and when he'd get remarried and all this and that. It's sort of true, but not quite. Henry did not want divorces, he wanted annulments. And other kings who had the same problem with Henry, wanting a male heir, would get them. But Henry, after being granted an annulment by the English Church, was overridden by the Pope in Rome. It just so happened that Henry's wife's brother, Henry's brother-in-law, the King of Spain, had an army next to Rome, and Queen Catherine wrote to her brother and got her brother to basically pressure the Pope not to grant an annulment. And that began this whole Henry VIII and divorce. But Henry always considered himself a Catholic. Henry's Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, was affected by Lutheran ideas, but during Henry's lifetime, Cranmer was able to persuade the king only to authorize the writing of the Great Litany in English and replace Latin Bibles with English Bibles in churches. The Mass remained in Latin, and priests remained celibate. Lutheran and Calvinist ideas did have their day, however, during the brief reign of Edward VI, Henry's son, and it was during this first period the first English Book of Common Prayer in 1549 was issued, making uniform worship throughout the realm the norm. The Protestant direction of the Edwardian Reform was halted in 1553 by Edward's half-sister Mary, who returned England to the Latin Mass and allegiance to the Pope. So we went from priests could be married to they could not be married, services in English with the New English Book of Common Prayer, back to services in Latin with the Latin Missal. When Mary died after 5 years, Elizabeth I, Mary's half-sister, inherited the throne. That was 1558. And Elizabeth adopted a distinctively Anglican via media or middle way which became the face of church life. Elizabeth maintained the continuity of apostolic succession through the consecration of her Archbishop Matthew Parker. A national church outside the authority of Rome or Geneva was what resulted. The Anglican settlement of Elizabeth is much more important in the shaping of the Anglican way than anything done by Henry VIII. One important religious and cultural monument of the Reformation that does owe a good deal to continental Protestant influences was the translation into English of the Bible. From John Wycliffe and William Tyndale to the various translators of the Reformation era, finally to the authorized or King James Version of the Bible written in 1611, the English Bible emerged as a literary masterpiece and a cherished national treasure of the English Church. In the 1580s, Richard Hooker offered the classical defense of the Anglican middle way in his work, The Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity, holding that the English Church was continuous with the Apostolic Church, was both Catholic and Reformed. He rejected the claims both of Rome and of the increasingly influential Puritans. Hooker offered the English way of understanding the church authority as based on scripture, tradition, and reason. We'll later look at Hooker's three-legged stool when we talk about authority in the Anglican way. Under the early Stuart kings, James I and Charles I, Puritanism grew and increasingly challenged royal authority in ecclesiastical as well as political and financial affairs. The influence of Calvinism led the Puritans to understand the church as a gathering of the elect and to reject episcopacy. Some dissenters fled abroad to Holland or to the New World in search of religious freedom. We call these the Pilgrims. These challenges culminated in the English Civil War that lasted from 1642 to 1649. The Puritans, under Oliver Cromwell, abolished the episcopate as well as the monarchy, substituting a Presbyterian form of government for the church and a commonwealth for a king. However, with the restoration of the monarchy under Charles II in 1660, the historic episcopate and the Anglican settlement were restored as well. Throughout these troubled times, the English church moved back and forth in response to political changes, but its continuity was never broken, and the Elizabethan via media endured. Stemming from its rather multivariant past, a national Church of England held together faithful believers with many convictions, ranging from Anglo-Catholics or High Churchmen to Evangelicals or Low Churchmen. But an English national church continued to govern itself through bishops and worship together according to the Book of Common Prayer. Next class, we now move to America.